All right, go ahead and get started. My name is Alexandria Scott. I'll be your facilitator for the evening. I'm a community engagement coordinator working for the Oregon Water Resources Department. Today, we're here to talk to you about the Division 512 rules update. As some of you might be familiar, those are the rules that govern groundwater use and allocation here for the Harney Basin. For the last couple of years, the department has been going through a rulemaking process to update the rules. If those of you can remember, back in 2016, we also did a rules update. We're here to share the outcomes of that rulemaking, give you an opportunity to ask some questions. It's really important to ask questions during that point because once we transition to the public hearing portion of this, the department can no longer answer. It is simply folks will state their comments and we will receive them. Before we get started too deep, I'm going to go ahead and kick it over for some Water Resources Department introductions, and then we will get going with the presentation.
Feels like very formal.
I know.
We're trying not to make it so formal. So I'm Kevin Lyons, I'm the water policy analyst and coordinator for this process. Yeah.
And I'm Jason Street. I'm the East Region Manager for Oregon Water Resources at Baker City.
I'm Dallas Wallace and I'm Water Master for this district.
Okay.
Hey, you
Perfect.
might as well introduce.
Yeah,
Yeah, please.
absolutely.
Go ahead, John. John Short, water rate consultant.
Hey, everybody, I'm Nick Green. I've been a city manager in Oregon off and on for about 6 years, and I'm currently consultant Catalyst. That's the company that I founded to do public policy advising. And one of my clients is the city of Burns, so I'm here representing them. Just wanted to hear your information briefing and maybe at the right time share some of their thoughts.
And I'm Jack Southworth and I ranch here in Bear Valley. And while I've helped with the facilitation of the collaborative group, I know very little about the rulemaking. So this will be interesting to me to learn more about what.
Great. Okay. Well, we will go ahead and get started. Just one minor thing. I think you heard it already, but this meeting is being recorded. And within 48 hours of our informational session and public hearings, we are posting these to our webpage. So if folks are not able to attend this evening, please point them towards the webpage because we're going to have those available. We've got meeting materials over in the back. We'll talk through that as we go. So if you didn't get a copy, you're more than welcome to. If not, we'll walk you through all of that. Ready to go?
Yeah, ready to go.
Switch your spots.
Thanks, Alexandria.
Yeah.
Yeah, so sort of what Alexandria was talking about earlier. This presentation is kind of a high-level summary of really 2 years of conversation, working with Harney County, with residents of Harney County, well, not only residents of Harney County, but also a 32 individual rules advisory committee. John was one of the members. Commissioner Rao of this county was one of the members as well. And we're just providing, hopefully, some understanding. Okay, we have a general idea of what the plan is, and it's just like a high level, not diving too much into detail because there's a lot there for 2 years. And general plan is first we'll talk about why are we doing this rulemaking, and then discuss what the strategies and tools that the department has to address the declining groundwater problem. So we're looking specifically at classification, serious water management problem area. Those 2 tools apply to here in Seneca and Grant County, and then the critical groundwater area, that's only for Harney County, down in the Harney County reservoir. Sorry, Harney Reservoir. Then we'll open up to quick Q&A, and then from there we'll go into a public comment. So we can go to the next slide. Let's talk about why this rulemaking is needed. So Alexander provided some brief background here, but back in 2016, the department did a rulemaking and established a administrative boundary called the Greater Harney Valley Area of Concern. And basically, you want to go grab the exhibits so they can point them out there. Basically, well, anything within that administrative boundary, we would not accept any new groundwater right permits. With some caveats and exceptions written to the rules in 2016, but we essentially shut down the lowland area of the Harney Reservoir to any new development. Lowland area of the Harney Reservoir is basically where all the pumping centers are and where we're seeing the most severe groundwater funds. On the same time in 2016, we initiated a study with the United States Geological Service, the USGS. Thank you. We initiated a groundwater study that took place over the course of 6 years, ending in 2022. And the study was published, and we have some, we gained some understanding, right? So the first thing that we learned around the groundwater reservoir is that it is the Harney Reservoir is one groundwater reservoir, meaning that there are no physical barriers. Water can move from north to east, east to west. And we learned that it occurs in multiple connected geological units. So you can think of rocks. So anywhere in the basin, water is going to behave differently depending on what type of rocks are underneath that soil. So in some areas, we have rocks that are very porous, have large holes that the water can travel easily through, and other areas, it is not very porous rock, so water moves very slowly. And because of that, we see various rates and magnitudes of recharge and discharge that are based on their location. So how groundwater behaves in the northeast is very different from how it behaves in the south. Right, so it is one connected, but it's certainly not homogeneous reservoir. It's a heterogeneous reservoir. The reservoir, next slide, please, meets 3 statutory criteria that gives the department authority to designate the reservoir or the basin a critical groundwater area. So the 3 that we are looking at is 1, decline excessively declining, and about to be is or about to be overdrawn. So going to decline excessively, this is a magnitude-based criteria. So it is 50 feet from the highest known mark. The groundwater levels have declined 50 feet from the highest known mark. And then excessive declining is a rate-based criteria. So that's 3 feet per year for 10 years. Overdrawn is a little bit more complex to explain, and it takes more of a groundwater hydrologist to explain it. I'm a policy guy, so my knowledge is a mile wide but an inch thick. But basically, overdrawn means that the recharge going into the basin, we're pumping out the recharge as it comes in. And that leads no discharge into springs and streams. So it's a pretty severe situation. So let's go start digging in a little bit more. How do we know this?
So it's overdrawn basin-wide, and the first 2 criteria are more local, where you have forms of depression.
Yes, yeah, and we'll see with the overdrawn that there are certain regions that are meeting that overdrawn, and then there are other regions that are not meeting that criteria yet.
So it's not necessarily basin-wide.
It's not basin-wide, yes. Okay, so in terms of defined excessively, this is a map of the Harney Basin Reservoir. And these red dots here are the wells that we know that have triggered the decline excessively. So they have gone down 50 feet from their highest known.
So for Nick, where would Burns be in that map? The very upper left-hand corner?
Burns would be in this area here, yes. Yeah, you can notice that Burns doesn't necessarily have a well that is triggered decline excessively. There's a couple of reasons for that. One, the data that we have is very limited. So either the wells that we have are either missing the historic level or not submitting static water levels. So these are the wells we know right now, but there is very likely other wells that are meeting that condition. We just don't have the complete data set to show that. And as we go on for the next several years, there are likely more wells that are going to meet this condition. Anything they should add?
No, that's great, I think.
Okay.
But isn't it also Burns' location help with the fact that it's on the edge of the aquifer, and there's a lot of recharge coming in right there. Yeah.
Yeah, it is an area of recharge. Okay. Yes, excessively declining rate. So that's that rate base. That's 3 feet per year for 10 years. Again, so these are all the wells that we know that are meeting right now, that are meeting that excessively declining. And again, like declining excessively, our data set isn't complete. So it's missing either historical data or measurements. So there would be more wells rather than these 50 that are meeting that excessively decline. And then to your question about overdrawn, next slide, the USGS report So just focus on this here, broke up the Hardy Reservoir into three hydrological units. Where the western, north, and south, they are broken into these hydrological units because groundwater behaves differently in those three units. When you look at the Hardy Basin Reservoir, you have the uplands and the lowlands. So this yellow boundary, anything within that yellow boundary is the lowlands. And then anything outside of the yellow boundary is the uplands. Uplands recharges into the lowlands. So Seneca up here, we're in a recharge zone and it recharges the lowland part of the Hardy Reservoir. In terms of overdraw, right, so that means that pumping out what is going in, there is one region, the northern region here. Up here has met that definition of overdraw. So. Thank you. Thanks, Alexandra. The pumping, the recharge going in is equals the pumping going out. And then the western region, indicated by the yellow over here, is about to be overdrawn. So we're right on the edge. We're not necessarily balanced, but we still have a little bit of recharge going in the western region. But we know that authorized use, when they're not pumping all the water they can. And if they pump at least 4,500 more, then the western region would be considered overdrawn. But right now, it meets the definition of about to be overdrawn, which is one of the criteria designated division in the federal groundwater statutes.
So. And we're a small group, is it all right, I keep interrupting?
No, please, go ahead, yeah.
But
Yes.
I can be more polite. But look at the map, the north region, there's hardly an irrigation well in it. Am I right? And yet we're the most severely overdrawn. I don't get it.
Northern region includes like, it actually includes Crane Buchanan, Rattlesnake.
Okay, so it would go south of Highway 20.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Great. Next slide. Okay, so that was the reason, right? So we have declining groundwater levels and has triggered the declining excessively declining and overdrive. So let's talk about our strategies and tools that we are going to implement with these rules.
Gilly,
Yeah, I got it.
could you back up one
Yeah,
slide?
sure.
Talk about the columns there a bit, because, the difference between,
Please.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
I'm gonna jump in.
Yeah.
These two columns represent two different things. One is that this column represents the difference between lowland recharge and actual what we see as pumping today, or I think it's back to 2018, which is similar to today. And back then, the pumping in the northern region was actually overdrawn by 2,700 acre feet. In the southern region, not quite overdrawn down here in the Diamond area, the Woodson area. And then the western region, like Kelly said, was nearly overdrawn. And so if we look at this column represents what could be pumped if you pump all of the paper water rights. So if all of the paper water rights are developed that are authorized today, then the problem gets much, much worse. So in the northern region, then you would be overdrawn by 96,454 acre feet, which is huge, and that's massively overdrawn. Western region would go from being nearly overdrawn to, well over overdrawn. So, that is part of the issue, is that we still have a lot of paper water rights that, could potentially irrigate. And so that's what those two columns are.
Thank you.
So,
Yeah.
And 2018 was the last year of data for the groundwater study. So if you hear references to 2018 pumpage, that's why.
Great. I appreciate us three together makes one Tim.
I don't know.
I'll let him know. Yeah, no, you'll know, you'll see the recording. Anyways, on to what the tools that we're gonna implement and the strategies that we're gonna take, so we can go to the next slide here. So the strategies that we are taking to address declining groundwater levels is, first, we're going to protect recharge. We're then going to reduce groundwater use and then achieve accountable water use. And so how we plan on doing that? For protecting recharge, we're going to use a very third tool on this step over here, called classification. So the classification tool essentially allows the department to define how groundwater in this case can be used and the quantity of that use. So we say groundwater can be used for exempt, in this case, exempt uses only. And we didn't define quantity because exempt uses don't need permanent water rights. So it allows us just to define how the water can be used and the quantity used. We then have the series water management problem area, or the SWAMPA. That is a tool that anyone within the SWAMPA boundary, any permanent groundwater user must measure and report their use each year by December 31st, in this case. These two tools are applied to Seneca. The critical groundwater area tool does not apply to Seneca. It only applies to the Hardy Basin, the lowlands of the Hardy Basin. So a critical grounding area allows us to control, is the only tool that allows us to control current groundwater use. And in order for the department to do that, we have to jump through a series of hoops, I would say. The first, a reservoir, a part or all the reservoir needs to meet criteria, and we discussed that. So we met excessively declining excessively, and about to be or is overdrawn. If a reservoir meets the criteria laid out in the statutes, the department could then designate the reservoir a critical groundwater area. But in order for us to designate a reservoir, a critical groundwater area, we need to go through the rulemaking process. And that's what we've been doing for the past 2 years. We're on the second phase of the rulemaking process now, which is the public comment phase. Once the rules are adopted, the reservoir is designated critical groundwater area, but it does not result in where we start controlling, regulating current groundwater use. We then need to go through a legal process called the contested case process, where we issue orders to groundwater rate users, invite them to be parties to a contested case, and then we take it through the courts, and may result in us regulating out groundwater levels. But again, note that only applies to Harney Basin and not Pacifica. And then from here, we pass it on to Jason, and he's going to talk about how we plan on implementing these tools.
And it would only apply to irrigation wells, not personal property, or not individual landowners, houses.
Yeah,
Not exempt.
not exactly. Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it doesn't apply to exempt uses, but it does apply to other uses besides irrigation. Like commercial uses or industrial uses, things like that, it actually does apply to municipal. And we'll talk a little bit. We'll talk first about classification, as Kelly mentioned. Classification allows the department, gives the department the authority to designate what uses are allowed in a particular area, and then the quantity of water those uses can consume. So classification, so we hosted a meeting, I don't know if, I'm sure, some folks were there, I'm sure you were there, Jack, in November 2022, we hosted a meeting explaining why the Seneca is included in the classification boundary. And the reason, as Kelly mentioned earlier, is because the recharge area for those lowlands down around Burns and south. This is a recharge area for those areas down below. We will designate the critical area. So that's the main reason. A secondary reason is also, just discussions with the RAC. For 512 rules, they prefer to have as to include the entire groundwater revenue classification. And so the classification boundary, you can see here, saw earlier on the earlier map, it's clear up here, it comes from the Grand Canyon and Seneca, and then comes all the way down, it goes all the way south of the lakes, clear down into Diamond Valley, and the Donner Basin area. So again, classification includes the department's authority to designate what uses can consume water in that area and how much. It does not address exempt uses, like you were talking about, Jack, that house wells, livestock wells, anything that doesn't require a permit or water right, the classification does not impact. Also does not impact non-consumptive geothermal uses like heating a house with a warm spring or warm water, groundwater that's not consumptive. But it does mean that no new groundwater rights can be issued. So if somebody were to apply for a new irrigation right or a new industrial right in the classification area, it's not likely that they would get a permit for that use. But it does not affect the transfer of water rights. So if you have so many acres that you want to move from one place to another within that area, or to a different use, you're still allowed to do that. Still apply and get a transfer.
Could you transfer from flood to sprinkler?
Oh, sure. Yeah, that's just gonna be up to you. You don't need to come through us to do that. If you wanted to upgrade your irrigation system.
You mean, so like, out of the river, pumping out of the river?
I'm not sure.
Okay,
There's no groundwater. You can't trade a groundwater for a surface water.
Okay,
yeah,
I
in
guess
some cases you can, but in this basin, it's not likely just because of the geology. So next I'll talk a little bit about the serious water problem area, tool use or small bill, really like to call it. So the swamp boundary, very similar, in fact, exactly the same as the classification boundary. And the reason why Seneca is included in the swamp bill, again, a recommendation from the RAC that it all be included. It simplifies things also to have that be included, but also it's really important to collect data on water use. And so what the swamp bill allows us to do is it require measurement on every well on every water right. So every water right that has a well associated with it, that well needs to have a measuring device on it under a swamp bill designation. The department already has the authority to require measurement devices on any point of diversion or point of appropriation or well. But this is a more blanket system to do that. So it's easier to just go ahead if we're gonna do it anyway and designate a swamp bill. And all that data is really important for us to know because that tells us whether we're on the right track when we start curtailments down in the critical area too.
So there's only one irrigation well in the Bear Valley, and so that would be the one. Say it, right?
Well,
There are 6 actual rights that would be impacted by the swamp boundary case. There are 2 irrigation rights that we found, right? And then 2 municipal or quasi municipal rights. One's the city of Seneca, and one's on the resort. And then there's 2 industrial rights and which may not even be used anymore. One says railroad. one's for
they were
railroad.
both Edward Hines.
Yeah.
They were both Edward Hines, water rights taken
yeah.
out.
Yeah. So of all these, actually 3 of them are already required and have a condition on the permit to install measurement. And then the other 3 are old enough, they did not get that condition. If they're used, they will be required to.
And by Seneca, is this Bear Valley and Silver Valley, or just Bear Valley?
Just, you're talking about well, Seneca, the city's right, and then the Silvies Valley Resort also has.
Go back to that real quick.
This night?
Yeah, just to point out where like, we have Seneca.
Well,
and
yeah.
Bear Valley.
You know where we are up in the.
Yeah.
Okay, so what we had proposed in the rules for the swamp by is that by March 2028, every user that has a groundwater right. Needs to install a totalizing flow meter. And the flow meter needs to be installed to manufacturer specifications, maintained. So it, actually does what it's supposed to do and needs to be accessible by department staff. We're not gonna be out there every day looking at it, but we wanna have the ability to go check and make sure it's working correctly and, there are no problems.
Will that be at the irrigator's cost expense?
It would be, but thank you for bringing that up, Jack. The department does have a cost share program going right now, and they will pay up to 75%. It's a reimbursement, so if you purchase a flow meter and have it installed, all of that expense could be included in that reimbursement. So 75% of whatever that total expense is could be reimbursed to you in this program. And we've had a number of wells already this year down in the basin that have taken advantage of that program. So tens of thousands of dollars worth of cost share have gone out to that. And we have a significant amount in that cost share bucket right now. that is available to anybody that wants to install a flow meter.
Down is the person you talked to for that.
Yep, Valley can help out with that, actually in the department. That would be the best one, because he's so familiar with that part. And then, if for some reason somebody decides that they don't want to, install a measuring device, we'll work with them, Dally will contact them and say, hey, you know, this is something we need to get done. If they still refuse, then we do have an enforcement program that we can go through, and it can get to the point where we issue, civil penalties for that. Typically, we don't have to get to that point, but the process is there if we need it. Next slide. And then all that data needs to be reported, so every month, the user goes out and reads the totalizer on the flow meter, records that number, and then at the end of the year, all of that for that irrigation season needs to be reported to the department by December 1st of that year. If for any reason, flow meter stops working, you know, a lot of different things can happen, just batteries can die, they can break, disconnected for some reason, whatever it is. Once that's discovered, it needs to be reported to the water master's office within 48 hours. And then, once it's reported, you know, during that time, you can still use water for up to 60 days while we're waiting for either repair or replacement of the flow meter. And, after that 60 days, we would have to shut the well off. Or, you know, the water master would have to come up and regulate it off. But, as we go through that 60-day period, we still have to get data from the pumping, so we can take things like, power meter readings and calculate out how much water is being used during that 60-day period, or wait for the meter to get repaired. And then once it is repaired, then we report that to the water master too, so we know everything's good to go. So we got a couple of slides here about the critical groundwater area that we'll go through, just
Yeah, and I
very simple, high level stuff.
feel like Nick might have specific questions, so we
Yeah,
kind of
and let's
changed-
go, if we can go back, maybe once we get through these two slides, we'll go to the municipal slides and we'll talk about that too, so, not that. Nick. So the goal for each sub area, so there's 7 sub areas that we've split the critical area into, because, and the reason we did that is to target specific areas of decline, or we have significant declines in some areas and less significant in others. We want to be able to focus on those areas that have significant decline or have a very high impact on another sub area. And so we split that out into 7 different sub areas. And our goal for each of those sub areas is to stabilize groundwater within 30 years. And what we heard a lot from the RAC was, you know, it took us so long to get into this situation that we should have time to get back out of it again. So we agreed with that. We thought, well, we'll give it a 30-year timeline to get stable. And when we say stable, it means dynamically stable. We're gonna see, you know, fluctuations in the groundwater level over time, but we want to see over about a 6-year period, things to stay pretty much the same, you know. So our goal, or the target water level trend, is what is the term we use, is 0 decline. And that's over that 6-year period. And once again, as you can see by the bright red lettering, Seneca is not included within the critical area boundary. And so these critical area rules will not impact this area here in Grand Canyon. So
we expected a different type of route.
What's that?
We expected like a different type of routes. We really wanted to make sure like this is
Yeah.
not a place.
Yeah. Okay, next slide. Please. And so a quick overview of that process. We set a minimum level of pumping we call permissible total withdrawal. Well, the minimum level of pumping that will meet the goal in 30 years. And what we call that is the permissible total withdrawal. And that means that there's a certain amount of water that can be pumped that's sustainable, that will equalize across the basin to get us to 0 decline. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna take what we think is being irrigated today, approximately the same as what we had in 2018. And we are going to take that difference and we're gonna, make reductions over a 20-year period, so we get to that permissible total withdrawal level.
So level is not amount, it's an elevation.
Well, it's not when I say permissible total, or are you talking about the groundwater level?
Well, it says set minimum level, is that an amount? I guess
That is an amount. Yeah.
So, my mind, which should be in rules, said the maximum level of pumping that will.
Yeah, well, and that's the PTW, or what we call permissible total withdrawal, is the maximum level of pumping that is allowed.
Okay.
And so maybe should that say maximum level of pumping up there?
We should say maximum.
Okay, okay,
Yes.
that makes sense, Sharon.
Yeah.
But that's what that is. It's the maximum level of pumping that will get us to, you know, that level. And then we're gonna do those cuts to that level over a period of 6 years, from where we are today to that, permissible total withdrawal in the next 24 years. And then we're gonna do a review period every 6 years to see if we are on the right trend, to meet that level. And when we do those evaluations, we'll do so we're planning on starting in 2028. We'll do an evaluation in 2027 to see where we're at on that trend, if we're still in the expected range that we expect to be in. And then in 2028, we start with our curtailment. We take the first chunk of that curtailment off. And then 5 years after that, we're going to do another review of the trend and see where we're at. And depending on where we are on that trend, we'll either take another cut or we won't. And so we've included an adaptive management protocol in this in these reductions so that we don't over reduce. You know, we don't want to take water we don't need to get to that 0 decline. So what we'll do is we'll evaluate the median groundwater trend every 5 years and then implement whatever we need to on that 6th year for 24 years. And then, so if the water levels are on track and they're right in that range we expect them to be in, we will keep with the scheduled reductions that we have for each sub area. If we're higher than we're expecting and we're above our trend, then we have the ability to cut either completely or cut in half the amount of reductions that we're planning for that particular adjustment period. And if it's higher than expected, fewer reductions. If it's lower than expected, we can accelerate the reductions up to 100%. So depending on where we are on that trend, we can go higher or lower the next reduction. And then finally, when all this is done in 30 years, in 2058, we're going to reevaluate to see whether or not we met that target water level trend in 0 decline.
So you said there's 6 or 7 subregions in the Harney
There are
Basin?
7, yeah.
7, and are all 7 facing reductions?
All 7 are facing reduction.
Well, one of them is North Blitzen or Upper Blitzen, and there's no.
Upper Blitzen, you're right, John, thank you. It does, they are that, there's so little pumping there that we have not decided to curtail that. So the Upper Blitzen here, we are not curtailing any of that. Because there's so little groundwater pumping in here.
So then I'm confused, because first you said Seneca is not a critical groundwater area for concern, and yet we're on the map as the Sylvia's area, critical groundwater area.
Seneca's up there. Yeah.
Okay.
They had that little.
Okay.
So thank you. Do you want to go to the municipal slides so we can go through those real quick? Yes. Okay. So what we're doing with municipal rights is we are allotting 110% of the highest single year quantity recorded in the previous 5 years. So in this graph here, it shows 2020 through 2024. We looked at all of that data, and in 2020, this represents what actual reported use was for the city of Burns. In 2020, they reported use of 1,250 acre feet. And so what we would do in this case is we look back at those years and we allot all 1,250 acre feet plus 10%, which then equals 1,375 acre feet. We allot that to that municipality to give the municipality room to grow and expand their water use over time. And then each adaptive management checkpoint period, or every 6 years where we do those adjustments to our adaptive management schedule, we will adjust that and look back five years from that, well, in preceding 6, but 5 years from that particular day or point, and then we'll look at these levels again, see which one's the highest, give them all of that plus 10%. In the next check-in, so it can go up or down either way, depending on how much the city was using at that time. And frankly, I would recommend that you go back and look. We have our first informational session posted online. If you go back and look at that one where we talked about more about this, we had some really great questions from the city leaders over there in Burns and Hines that were answered at that informational session. Is there another one after this for municipal? Yeah, is that, okay, that's it. So where are we at then? Are we?
Well, we're at Q&A, but we would do Q&A at the time.
Right, so,
we'll keep
that's
one
the
question.
that's what we have for you guys.
One person has.
I'm happy to answer, or, the team here is happy to answer any questions, any other questions you might have.
I guess I'd like to just, well, first say thank you, because I studied microbiology as an undergrad and did my master's in public administration, so I appreciate good science and good data and good policy. And I can tell that's where you're going. So all of those things I think are wonderful. Couple of concerns that City of Burns has, and we're trying to figure out how best to explain those and maybe offer some proposed alternatives to the rulemaking.
So, okay, we need, so this,
Do you want that in the public testimony part?
yeah, just the, that sounds like you're going towards more public.
Well, I'll repeat it in public testimony. I actually do have a question.
Okay, sure, as long as you're.
I want you guys to answer it. and
Yeah.
You won't be able to answer it in the public.
No,
testimony.
absolutely, okay.
So I
making
will
sure.
repeat it for the record.
Okay.
The trend line is going down.
Mhm.
It's gonna go down significantly after 2026 because we're about to spend $3 million on water conservation and measures within the city limits.
Oh, okay, gotcha.
To seal the water distribution lines that are 50 years old. Burns has a significant amount of leakage.
Mhm.
If you look at the amount of water Burns uses compared to other cities, which is documented in their water conservation plan, was updated a couple of years ago. They're 40% higher than the next nearest city. Our concern is the rolling average potentially could become punitive because you're gonna measure 110% off of the reduced amount.
Mhm.
They're doing what you want them to do. And now we're gonna cap it for.
Yeah,
The other thing that we're concerned about is the other state policies that are encouraging growth within cities. We've got $8 million in construction currently at 160 homes to the city of Burns.
yeah, I heard about that.
I'm the lead for that project. Another 3 million for phase 2.
Hmm.
Burns has some really powerful things going for it economically. And so, if this rule were in effect, measuring off of the conserved amount after 2026, they would not have been able to permit the housing amount because it would have exceeded that.
So that would bring the total at more than 10%. Yeah.
But it still would have been significantly lower than the 2020 usage.
Mm.
So I wanted to hear your thoughts. Did you consider those scenarios as you were looking at the rulemaking? Did you consider offering credit for cities that are voluntarily conserving? And have you considered looking at municipalities as a collective as opposed to individually? Because Seneca, and I hate to say it, but Seneca is forecast to lose 30% of its population in the next 15 years. It's just aging, right?
Yeah.
It's an aging population and other things. And cities that are interested in growing are investing in housing benefit from the natural reductions. So I'm asking if these things were discussed and considered. It would be similar to land banking. In this case, we'd be talking about water banking across municipalities. Were those things discussed at any point during?
We did not talk about water banking between municipalities or grouping them together, but what I hear you saying is, should we consider like maybe the population of Burns versus a similar sized city elsewhere, and then, considering the uses and maybe allocating to a use that would be, typical for a city of that size,
Or
plus
What-
10%.
well, the 10% is really what we're struggling with. Where did that
Okay.
number come from? How is it derived? Why is it 10% and not some other number?
Mhm.
There aren't a lot of triggers that put them above 10%, but there are a few. One is a major housing development.
Mhm.
We don't want to be in a situation where they can't approve that.
Yeah.
Another is data centers, which is a huge area of incentive for the state of Oregon, and Burns happens to be sitting adjacent to the biggest fiber optic plant in the state. And it goes from Pittock out west or out east, and they have a very attractive scenario right now with 30 acres of industrial land that's improved. And will be shovel ready at the end of this year and pass through the fiber optic pipe. And the water the city has available. So if that's not available to them.
Yeah.
We're artificially curtailing their economic growth while they're simultaneously making conservation measures. I just don't understand. I don't want it to be punitive. They don't want it to be punitive. They want to do their part. I guess the other thing that we just wanted to point out, and again, I'll repeat this during public testimony. All the cities combined in their peak years make up about 1.5% of the total. So it's a lot of stick for very little gain. When you look at the broader basin, is there flexibility to create some opportunity for the cities not to lose out on economic value that benefits the entire region?
Right.
When we're really talking about a de minimis amount of total water consumption. across
Yeah,
the
and you make a great point, and I think it's great, make sure you get that on the record, because we certainly are open to changing, this scheme, for, if we hear, public comment to that effect, and, we'll definitely reevaluate all of the comments that we hear, and just, because we didn't do a lot of the things you suggested, when we were building these rules. But the reason we went to this point where we are only allocating or proposing to allocate 110% or a lot 110% of the water to the city greatest use was because the city has plenty of room in their water right to grow. And we didn't want to allot water to just sit there, when there could be, because if we allot all of the city's water right to the city, that's water taken out of that PTW number, which means we are shutting off other farms that could be used in that water. And, while the city certainly has, we're giving them the ability to grow into that water right, we don't want to get to a situation where that water is not being used, and if the city isn't using it.
And they're unlikely to experience a boom that would trigger that 10% from the housing standpoint. But what would trigger is industry.
Sure, and like you said, I didn't realize they were sitting on the fiber optic line, so, that's something we need to talk about, and, yeah, we should appreciate that, so.
Commercial and industrial to be set as needed. Basically, you've got 40 other water rights in the basin that were not part of the 1660.
Yeah.
Total or 620 irrigation rights, and they were not set with any kind of reduction level.
Well,
but
I wouldn't go that far. I would say that we are gonna evaluate those based on their existing use. And so they could be reduced from the actual water right, but we're gonna look at their existing use and then allot water based on that historic use and that can, what, they need, but yeah.
and any water right could be transferred to municipal. They need to.
Well, but the reality is they haven't, right?
Yeah, you have it.
They haven't now. They're
Yeah, I
using
think
40% of their allocated water rights.
I think there's 20% is what we've been, 20% they're actually using of their entire water. It's not very much.
It's not very much, and they want the same things you want. They don't
Sure.
want to artificially restrict agricultural use just so they can keep a paper water right. It's the scenario where your gradual growth is fine. This rule doesn't really affect that. It's the staccato growth that we're actually actively pursuing.
Yeah.
And funding and incentivizing through other state agencies like Business Oregon. that we would trigger an exemption to the rule. And we want to have some latitude in making to account for that,
Yep.
because it's good for everyone.
Yep.
It's still a de minimis amount of total water use, but the amount of free cash flow it generates is.
Yep.
It's a catalyst to change, what has been a declining population, declining economy since we lost time.
Mhm.
So we're trying to create information age opportunities for rural communities. And we're negotiating with 13 different state agencies on subdivisions. So you guys are the agency number 14 with this rule.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to kind of share some of the challenges we're talking about, but also hear how this was derived, what your thoughts are on building in flexibility if there's still an opportunity to do that.
Yeah.
It's the Moby Dick scenario, but if we heard from that well, I don't want to drag it into the butt.
Yeah, no, we don't wanna do that either. I mean, we certainly don't wanna, we don't wanna handicap the city's growth, because one of the things we definitely looked at was, the economic impact to the Burns area, the county, and we certainly don't wanna impact that further or hamper growth in the future. So, I think that your points are very well taken, and, that's something we can certainly consider. All of this is not written in stone. Yet we have until August 7th
August 7th.
to.
We also have a meeting specific with the city on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Meeting with Roxanne.
And so, yeah,
Yeah,
And we have a consultant, Bob Long with CWMH2O that we're working with. He and I are putting together, just have some written comments that
okay,
we'll get to you well before the August 5th hearing date.
okay, perfect. That would be great. Yeah, I'm really glad you got up here to the meeting and can, provide some public comment.
And we're all supportive of the overall direction. It's the right thing to do. There's no question.
Sure,
We just want to make sure that we don't cement in something that's going to be problematic.
Yeah.
There
understood. Yeah,
is an unintended consequence.
sure.
But as we're cutting off really 50% of the water needs. Every ranch that gets impacted by that, is getting dried up and not getting bought by some biggie that can farm again, it's being dried, so they'll go bankrupt, they'll go out of business. We'll lose that much of the economy there, and that's what I'm saying, if the city were to keep a bucket, that's a bucket that just came from the farm, that could have maybe made it rather than having the city.
Yeah, I just, we want to reward good behavior. They're already here. They know to the gallon what they're pumping. And they're implementing measures that you can tell from the data are reducing the water consumption. Yeah, as written,
That's great.
as written, this rule will be punitive. Because it's gonna reduce further, every year they conserve. Reduces the rolling average, reduces the peak, 10% measurement, it's a double whammy.
But is the state be more conservative to fix those leaks?
Yeah, and I mean, this is a fun conversation. This is President Trump trying to save the deficit by attacking federal staff when the total federal labor makes up 7% of the federal budget. What do you freaking do? Right? And in this case, it's even worse. We're talking about 1% of the total federal budget.
Yeah.
So yay, we reduced 1% by 20%. Who cares? It's just not significant.
It's not, if you look at that, it is significant to the people we'd shut off, to give the
Well,
city the full water, but I get what you're saying,
the
there
city's
maybe
already-
needs to be more
Already
flexible.
voluntarily without this rule.
Sure, yeah,
Spending millions of dollars to reduce their water consumption.
Yeah.
But there isn't anything in the rule that rewards them for that good behavior.
right.
They
Or
actually,
does it for farmers, and they can put it on efficiency measures?
I would love to debate it. But- I'm gonna add it here. I'm like, hey, I like it. I'm complimenting.
So
Sure,
Pointing out.
this is why we have the public comment period, right? Because over 2 years, we had 15 meetings. Not everybody could be at the table for those meetings and participate or wanted to. Some people wanted to kind of wait and see what came out of that and then be able to comment. So we've had varying participation at meetings, and that's why we are having the informational sessions and public hearings this week, to give people time for the information to resonate, have some time to formulate what kind of comments they want to give when we come back in August. And recognizing that we tried our best to have diverse representation on our Rules Advisory Committee. But we didn't get to hear from everybody. So this is that chance for folks to bring their thoughts and contributions and for the department to consider them as best we can.
And they'll acknowledge they came very, very quickly. Very late. It wasn't until they saw the rule with the proposed cap, they even contracted.
Yeah, we heard that at the first meeting, yeah.
So apologies in advance.
No, no problem.
We're not trying to come in and poop the party.
No, that's totally understandable. We've had a lot of diverse opinions about the rules as we've gone through these, and so that's why we're taking that public comment, so we can.
There are a lot of other factors that affect the cities,
Sure.
especially in Hardin County and Grant County, Lake County, which is the vast majority of the property is farm deferral.
Yeah.
We don't derive property taxes for local investment from any of that. And their only source of offsetting income has been SRS, which is constantly under fire.
Yeah.
So they're getting a lot of macroeconomic and federal policy pressure that's causing them to decline. Communities raging, that's where they're causing them to decline. We have opportunities to ignite the economy with new industries, but some of them are thirsty. They're not that thirsty. But we don't want to have to kill those in the planning stage in order to continue to grow alfalfa in areas.
Yep, totally
Even if
understand.
that- I know that, again, I'm sorry, but that's the city's perspective.
Yeah,
So
no,
I'll
yep.
repeat that as best I can in public.
That'd be great. Really appreciate it.
So an acre under a pivot uses 1 or 2 acre feet per year.
2.5 is what we are
2.5.
planning to allot for the slide room.
Yeah. So we've got an example that we went through earlier in the week.
Okay,
This will help.
So my point is that 125 acres uses 312 acre feet, back to what Nick was saying, is that 4 pivots use what the entire city uses in its maximum year.
Wait a minute, let him explain this first. That 312 has already been cut in half.
well,
Okay, so.
I should say that.
I see what your point is.
So the
Jack.
point is, okay, it goes up to 8 pivots.
No,
Yeah.
it's the other direction, but.
Yeah.
This helps.
So just real quickly, let's go over this. So the way we are allotting water to all of the water rights throughout the basin is going to be, we are going to take all of the existing rights within the critical area. And we're going to allocate a lot then, a 2.5 acre foot per duty, per acre duty, which is the amount, the total volume for both primary and supplemental groundwater rights. And most of the existing water rights have a 3 acre foot duty, so we're cutting 0.5 acre foot off of that. And then we're gonna take a look at exactly where they're used, and we're gonna consider that historic use in our allotment for each water right. So we're gonna look at, a 5-year period from 2020, 2024, and identify the number of acres as in been actually irrigated, and then allot those acres to water. So in this case, you have 160 acre field in this black square here. So we have a 160 acre water right there. It covers the entire thing. Somebody put a only irrigating about 125 acres, so they're no longer irrigating these corners. So when we look at that water right, we're only going to allot water to that which has been historically irrigated in this 125 acre field. And so our calculation here below shows that we're only allocating 2.5 acre feet for each of these green acres within the pivot. And that totals out to 312.5 acre feet for that 125 acres. And we will not allot water to these corners that have not been used. And we'll look at that.
And that will get redistributed, right? So the goal of this, what we heard from the Rules Advisory Committee was they wanted to try to have, and we also as the department wanted to try to get water to as many people as possible and minimize the economic impacts. So we do not want to reward water that is not being used. We can then redistribute it to someone who would not be getting it if we allotted that full water right.
Right. Yeah, so that was corners of that, 35
Yeah, that 480 acre water right will only now be able to use, or 480 acre feet water right will now be able to have 312.5 before we even start our 35% cut.
That's, yeah, that's the allotment, and then after that is when we start doing the cuts back to PTW.
And the total number of 125 acre pivots in the Harney Basin is 100 or 200. Yeah, come on, don't shrug your shoulders. You've been at this like, no, I'm in ballpark. We can look at a map, we can count them, you can count them. What is
There's
it?
a lot of them, yeah.
What is it?
I haven't counted them, but I think they're
Yeah.
probably in the neighborhood, a couple
Yeah.
hundred of them at least.
So I think Nick makes a pretty good point, is that, an increase in population of Burns is not gonna break the backs of farmers in the Harney Basin. I mean, there isn't gonna be a huge transfer of water.
Oh, no, I would agree. He is, and that's why he's been saved. Hopefully, like the hot springs as well, but it'd be great to have some other industries as a third of the agriculture is wiped out.
Yeah.
Yeah, and the city's water right is significant enough that it would impact quite a few acres, we were allotting, cause all that water that we allot to the city. Comes out of that PTW, permissible total withdrawal that
You
they,
just said, right there, it's 500 acres, the city's.
oh, yeah, I mean, it's a lot, I'm not denying, you're absolutely right, Jack.
Now, you did, I wanna make sure I understand this. You're not proposing in rulemaking to withdraw the rights. You're
No,
proposing
We
to.
don't have the
regulate.
authority to do that,
Right, you're proposing to regulate.
correct?
That's done through an order. We're not changing their water right, we're just issuing an order for them to curtail back.
And the statutory authority to do that is cited.
It is,
That's
yeah,
what-
it's,
how I read this.
it is cited in the rules, yeah.
Kelly, this might show the graph that shows how much for each.
Yeah,
Thank you. The one right before that, I think, has how much the reduction in each.
Oh, each sub area.
You'd be the PTW for each sub area. There, that one, yeah.
That final column was how much.
In the critical area, let's be clear.
Yeah, so this is within those 7 sub areas within the critical area, and this is, the estimated pumpage from 2018, how many, thousands of acre feet per year. And then this is, after we do our proposed cuts, what we think is sustainable for each of those sub areas. And then the difference between those two. So we're taking an overall basin wide will be effectively a 35% cut in existing irrigation.
And that's after the corner's been.
Yeah, that's the, after the,
That's
so a lot.
the difference between today,
After the duty's been cut down and the corners.
Well,
they did, I mean, basically.
like this is today, this is what's happening today, whether you're using 2.5 or 3 acre feet on your pivot or whatever. And then this is what we're proposing.
Oh, you're right, yeah.
Under our scenario, yeah. Okay,
So Burns share would be increasing from 1% to 1.5%.
That's all the cuts I made.
Yeah.
Barring the fact that we're about to do a major water conservation.
So-
It's gonna reduce it below that, but you're right.
My question is, this is occurring throughout the West, right?
sure.
I mean, there is groundwater that is increasing anywhere. And so must be other places where municipalities and agriculture are after the same water. And so how do you achieve a highest and best use? Is there ever a market for a certain amount of water so that the public can decide, hey, I'm a hay grower and I think an acre foot's more valuable to me than your housing development. And I pay X dollars for it, and you want to pay X plus 10%, you win.
That's how Colorado does it.
It really hasn't worked.
The farms are going away.
They're going away, yeah.
And what we do, like, Umatilla has a critical area as well, and what the cities do there is they basically tell us every year, this is how much we're gonna need. And then that gets cut off of their allotment for farmers, so then if they increase, then we have to decrease what's used out in the irrigation world, you know? So, up to their allowed water right, you know, we would continue to give them more and more until they reach the limit of their water right. Before we would, you know, stop shutting on farmers when they increase. And so that's kind of how that's looking up there. And that's how we've done it.
So you're saying municipalities are seeing you to add?
Yeah, we are, in that case, it's basically senior to the Aggies.
That's because,
Is that right?
yeah, no, that's right, and that's, they're not, but that's because municipalities up there or the cities bring in more of the economic revenue than the actual agriculture.
Yeah,
And in birds, it's fascinating.
it's very related, like down here, you know, a lot of the businesses are related to agriculture, so it's a bigger impact than it is up there where they have a lot more going on within the cities, yeah.
We have a whole fiscal impact statement on that on our website. It's about 40 pages that we hired an independent consultant at the request of our Rules Advisory Committee that conducted that, along with our staff pulling information and data to try to put that together to try to help inform the rules that came out of this. So that was another step that the department took to try to
How many jobs?
understand that, yeah.
Jobs are lost.
Understand the implications of the rules and try to balance and try to come up with a solution to get water to as many people as possible, minimize the impacts, but recognize that inevitably there needs to be curtailment.
All right, anybody, any other questions?
Okay,
Kelly?
well, we're gonna have to take a pause, so fortunately, public comment has to start at 7, because that's when we advertised it, so we're gonna have to take a break. And we come back and we'll take public comment. Yep, okay, thank you all, appreciate it.
Take breaks your phone. Was that the Q and A then, or?
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
the Q